Why play Jinx Bot? Well, she scales into a hyper carry beast, her passive keeps her incredibly safe and gives her great potential for pentakills. She's great at both pushing and clearing waves, and she has a good amount of self-peel with zaps and traps. However, she is reliant on her team keeping her safe, and she is weaker during the early parts of the game. Jinx's passive gives her a massive amount of movement speed and attack speed when getting a takedown, killing an epic monster, or taking out an enemy structure. This lets you chase down your opponents or get to safety with ease. Jinx's Q swaps between her minigun and rocket launcher. With the minigun, Jinx's basic attacks give a good chunk of attack speed, stacking up to 3 times. So between this and lethal tempo, she shoots fast. When using the rocket launcher, Jinx gains attack range and her attacks deal slightly more damage in an AoE area. The rocket launcher does shoot slower, but if you start with a minigun and shoot 3 times to get the buff, you keep this buff while changing to the rocket launcher until it starts to drop off. Jinx's W is a long, straight line skill shot which damages, slows, and reveals the first enemy hit. Jinx's E throws out 3 traps which arm themselves after a short delay. When walked on, they root for 1.5 seconds and deal damage. Jinx's ultimate is a global ability which fires a huge rocket which explodes on the first enemy hit, damaging them and dealing slightly reduced damage to all targets nearby. After 1 second of travel, the rocket reaches full damage. If it hits an enemy before this, it does greatly reduced damage. Also, the rocket deals execute damage, so the lower the health of the enemy, the more damage it does. For combos, there's not much to talk about as Jinx should be the backline carry, simply right-clicking enemies. However, try to get your 3 attacks in with the minigun for the attack speed buff, before swapping to rockets for the AoE damage and extra range, simply using zap and traps to keep yourself safe. For Masteries, go for this. Lethal tempo is amazing and the sorcery tree secondary makes your late game even better. For build order, start Blade and Pot before getting tier 2 boots and Kraken Slayer. After this, get your Zeal attack speed item, followed by Infedge and Lord Doms, and then finish your build with any of these as needed. For skill order, start Q, then W, then E, before maxing Q, then W, then E, taking ult whenever you can. For summoners, take Flash and Heal. Jinx's laning phase is pretty straightforward. She wants to scale into a late game hyper carry, so look to keep yourself safe and farm as much as possible. You don't need to play over aggressive, risking yourself, and it's usually better to stay alive to get farm and XP. This said, however, she does have access to some pretty easy trades, especially if you stacked your minigun passive on minions. With the extra range and damage of rockets, swapping to rockets does give you pretty easy poke if your enemy is trying to farm. If they fall back, you can keep shooting them, and when they go out of your range, you can zap them for a nice chunk of damage. Other than that, if your support brings hard CC, you can easily follow up with your traps, keeping them stood still for ages, while your lethal tempo auto attacks do absolute work on them. Entering the mid game, with Jinx's attack speed buff, she's able to shred towers fast, so look to take your tower before heading to the mid lane. Keep farming to get your late game as fast as possible, but keep taking towers where possible and be at all objectives, but the main thing to do is to stay with your team who will keep you safe. Entering the late game team fights, you are now a hyper carry beast. However, make sure to be mindful of what's trying to kill you. Keep in mind your opponent flanking you or anything that goes over the front line to get you. Being aware of these threats gives you good awareness to avoid them. When the fight starts, play the backline hyper carry. Stack your minigun passive and then change to rockets to AoE down everything from a very safe distance. When you're attacking a single enemy, as long as you don't need the extra range to kite them, change to minigun and just shred them. Use your W and E to keep yourself safe and your ultimate to get that first takedown to proc your passive, allowing you to run around the fight killing everything.